In the early 20th century, as empire trembled and revolutions ignited, one figure stood at the center of global upheaval: Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. The architect of the Bolshevik Revolution and the founding leader of the Soviet Union, Lenin did not merely seek change within Russia. He envisioned a worldwide movement of oppressed peoples rising against imperialism. Among the nations that captured his revolutionary imagination was China, a vast land under semi-colonial domination, racked by internal decay, yet brimming with potential for upheaval. Lenin never traveled to China, but his writings and strategies profoundly shaped the trajectory of the Chinese Revolution. To understand Lenin's outlook, one must first appreciate the depth of his revolutionary philosophy. Lenin was a Marxist, but he went beyond Karl Marx in critical ways. Marx had developed his theory in the context of 19th-century industrial Europe, envisioning proletarian revolutions in advanced capitalist societies. Lenin, however, observed that capitalism had changed by the early 20th century. In his landmark 1916 work, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, he argued that capitalism had evolved into a global system where powerful nations dominated colonies and semi-colonies. This meant that revolution was not confined to the working class of Europe's industrial centers. Instead, Lenin insisted, the oppressed nations of Asia, Africa, and Latin America would become central actors in the global anti-capitalist struggle. China, in his eyes, was a prime example. At the dawn of the 20th century, China was in a state of turmoil. The once mighty Qing dynasty collapsed in 1911 after centuries of decline. Foreign powers, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Japan, had carved the country into spheres of influence, controlling trade, railways, and entire coastal concessions. China remained technically independent, but in practice it was a semi-colony, humiliated by unequal treaties and weakened by internal strife. Regional warlords ruled like kings, peasants endured crushing poverty, and intellectuals searched for a way forward. For Lenin, China embodied his theory of imperialism, a great nation strangled by foreign domination, but one with untapped revolutionary energy. Lenin frequently referenced China in his writings and speeches. In his critique of imperialism, he pointed to the Opium Wars and the partitioning of Chinese territory as glaring examples of capitalist exploitation. He argued that China could not modernize so long as it remained under imperialist domination. Liberation from foreign control was a prerequisite for genuine progress. More importantly, Lenin developed a strategic position on colonial and semi-colonial countries. He believed Marxists had to actively support national liberation movements, even if those movements were led by non-socialist forces. The logic was straightforward: first, break the chains of imperialism, then push the struggle further toward socialism. This position was evident at the 1920 Baku Congress of the Peoples of the East, organized under Lenin's direction. The gathering brought together revolutionaries from across Asia, including Chinese delegates. In his address, Lenin called on the oppressed nations of the East to rise against imperialism, declaring that colonial peoples would be a decisive force in dismantling world capitalism. For the Chinese revolutionaries in attendance, these words carried immense significance. Lenin envisioned a two-stage path for China's revolution. The first stage, which he called the National Democratic Revolution, required uniting all patriotic forces, workers, peasants, intellectuals, petty bourgeoisie, and even national capitalists, against imperialist domination and feudal warlords. This stage was not yet socialist in character, but it was essential for clearing the way. Once China achieved national liberation, the second stage would follow, a socialist revolution led by the working class and a disciplined communist party. Unlike Marx, who had focused on industrial workers in Europe, Lenin recognized that in a country like China, the vast peasantry would play a decisive role. This adaptation was groundbreaking, and it later allowed Marxism to take root in societies far removed from industrial Europe. Lenin's theories did not remain abstract. They had direct political consequences in China's revolutionary movements. During the 1910 and early 1920, Sun Yat-sen, the leader of the Chinese Nationalist Party, Kuomintang, sought allies for his struggle to unify China. Western powers ignored him. Lenin, however, extended Soviet friendship. In 1923, shortly before his death, Lenin encouraged Soviet aid to Sun Yat-sen's movement, urging cooperation between Chinese nationalists and communists. This laid the foundation for the first united front, formed in 1923, in which the newly established Chinese Communist Party and the nationalists worked together against warlords and imperialists. Lenin's broader philosophical contributions also left a lasting mark on Chinese revolutionaries. He developed the theory of the vanguard party, arguing that revolutions required disciplined, centralized leadership rather than spontaneous uprisings. The Chinese Communist Party, founded in 1921, was explicitly modeled on this Leninist conception. Similarly, his argument that revolutions would erupt first in the weak links of imperialism, countries like Russia or China, gave Chinese revolutionaries confidence that their nation, despite its backwardness, could become a center of world revolution. Perhaps most crucially, Lenin's insistence on the worker-peasant alliance shaped the CCP's strategies. While Marx had privileged the industrial proletariat, Lenin understood that in a country like China, the peasantry was the majority and could be mobilized for revolutionary ends. Lenin died in January 1924, just as Soviet advisors began actively supporting both the Kuomintang and the CCP. His death did not diminish his influence. On the contrary, his ideas provided ideological clarity to Chinese communists navigating the complex reality of semi-colonial society. When Chiang Kai-shek later turned against the communists, leading to years of civil war, Lenin's framework still guided the CCP's strategy. Build a vanguard party, unite with peasants, and fight imperialism as the first step toward socialism. Mao Zedong, who emerged as the CCP's leader in the late 1920s, repeatedly acknowledged Lenin's importance. Mao called Lenin's theory of imperialism the key to understanding China's plight, and he drew heavily from Lenin's recognition of the peasantry's revolutionary potential. At the same time, Mao innovated beyond Lenin, particularly by emphasizing protracted guerrilla warfare as a strategy suited to China's geography and social conditions. Still, without Lenin's theoretical foundations, Mao's revolution may never have found its ideological compass. Lenin's legacy in China can be seen across three dimensions. Ideologically, he expanded Marxism to include anti-imperialism in peasant struggle, making it applicable to China's conditions. Practically, his Soviet Union offered direct support to early Chinese revolutionaries, both nationalist and communist. Globally, he placed China within the larger narrative of world revolution, recognizing that colonial and semi-colonial struggles were inseparable from the fate of international socialism. Even today, the Chinese Communist Party describes itself as Marxist-Leninist, a reminder of how deeply his influence is woven into its origins. Although Lenin never set foot in China, his ideas helped shape its modern history. He looked at China not merely as a victim of empire but as a future leader in the global struggle against imperialism. Through his writings on imperialism, his support for national liberation, and his insistence on disciplined revolutionary organization, Lenin gave Chinese revolutionaries the tools to transform their society. His legacy lived on through Mao Zedong, the triumph of the Communist Party, and the creation of the People's Republic of China. And while modern China has evolved far beyond Lenin's original vision, the roots of its revolutionary path remain distinctly Leninist. Lenin's perspective on China reminds us that revolutions are never confined to one land, they are interconnected struggles, shaped by local realities yet bound by global ideas. In China's case, Lenin's theories were not simply abstract doctrines, they became the blueprint for one of the greatest social transformations in modern history.